Good evening. I'm Clara Nightwell, and tonight I'm here with Rowan Hartsteele. Tonight, we want to talk about a man and a character many of us still miss.
Columbo wasn't born with Peter Falk. The character existed before him. Someone else played the role first, but when Peter Falk arrived, something changed. He didn't take the role. He absorbed it.
And the strange part is that he didn't need the part at all.
No. He had already been nominated for the Academy Awards. He was already respected. He could have chosen safer paths. Instead, he chose a wrinkled coat, an uncertain walk, a voice that hesitated, and a detective who never seemed entirely present.
A man who didn't look like a hero.
And that's what made him unforgettable. As the years passed, Peter Falk aged, and when Columbo returned in the 1990s, he was older, slower, and somehow more Columbo than ever. The age didn't weaken the character. It completed him.
Because Columbo himself was always a mystery.
We never knew his first name. We never saw his family. We never truly knew if he was pretending or if he simply was that way. In a show where the crime was obvious, the real enigma was the man asking the questions.
Tonight, we're not just talking about a television character.
We're talking about presence, about time, and about an actor who didn't play Columbo. He was Columbo.
Rowan, before Columbo existed, before the coat, before the voice, who was Peter Falk?
He was a boy who learned very early that the world could take something from you and still expect you to keep going. Peter Falk lost his right eye when he was just 3 years old after a serious illness. From that moment on, he wore a glass eye for the rest of his life. It changed the way people looked at him. And perhaps more importantly, it changed the way he looked at himself. In a world obsessed with symmetry and appearances, young Peter grew up knowing he would never fit the idea of a leading man.
So even before acting, he was already outside the frame.
Exactly. And that distance shaped him. He didn't grow up dreaming of fame. He studied political science. He worked in government. He lived a life that looked practical, grounded, ordinary. But something kept pulling at him. A need to observe people, to listen, to understand how they spoke when they weren't trying to impress anyone. Acting came late, and when it came, it wasn't welcomed easily. Casting directors told him he didn't look right, that he wasn't handsome enough, that he wasn't what television wanted.
But rejection doesn't always push people away.
Sometimes it sharpens them. Instead of trying to become someone else, Peter Falk leaned into what made him different. The pauses, the hesitations, the way his thoughts seemed to arrive just a second late. Those imperfections became his language. Long before Columbo, the man was already there. Quiet, observant, slightly underestimated.
Rowan, how did the world begin to notice him?
Almost by accident. Peter Falk didn't break into acting loudly. He appeared quietly, in roles that felt small at first, but stayed in people's memory. When he began working in film and television, he was often cast as secondary characters. Men who entered a scene briefly, spoke little, and yet somehow remained present even after they left. There was something about him that resisted forgetting. Then came the unexpected. Falk received Academy Award nominations early in his career. Recognition arrived not because he fit Hollywood's image, but because he brought truth. He was proof that presence could outweigh beauty, that sincerity could outweigh polish.
So he had already proven himself before Columbo ever existed.
Yes, that's what makes his choice so meaningful. At that point, Peter Falk could have followed a conventional path, serious films, respectable roles, safe prestige. Instead, he remained drawn to characters who lived in the margins, men who observed more than they spoke. He understood something deeply personal. People often reveal themselves when they think they are not being watched. This sensitivity became his strength. He didn't dominate scenes. He waited inside them. And in that waiting, something extraordinary was forming.
Rowan, when does Columbo truly begin? Not the title, not the idea, the real Columbo.
Columbo begins the moment Peter Falk touches him, because before Falk, the detective existed as a concept, a role written on paper, something that could be performed in different ways. But Falk understood something that most actors don't dare to do. He didn't try to make the detective impressive. He tried to make him harmless. He shaped Columbo as a man who looked like he shouldn't be there. The coat too old, the hair uncombed, the posture slightly apologetic, a voice that wandered, a gaze that seemed distracted.
Almost as if the character was built to be underestimated.
Exactly. Underestimation wasn't a side effect. It was the method. In the classic detective story, you follow clues and try to solve the mystery alongside the detective. But Columbo changed the structure. Often, you already know who did it. You've watched the crime. You've watched the killer clean the scene and build their alibi. So the mystery isn't the crime. The mystery is Columbo. He arrives like an inconvenience. Polite, respectful, almost too gentle. He asks simple questions. He forgets small details. He repeats himself. He apologizes for taking your time. And while the murderer relaxes, while they begin to believe they are in control, Columbo is listening, watching, building a map of the person in front of him. Peter Falk's genius was rhythm. Columbo didn't interrogate, he drifted. He lingered at the door. He turned back with one more question, and that question never sounded dangerous. It sounded almost naive.
The famous moment. The one more thing.
Yes. It became iconic because it was never about the line. It was about the pause before it, the way he looked down, the way he seemed unsure, the way he made you feel safe for a second too long. And that's why Falk became Columbo. Because the character wasn't a set of traits. It was a delicate psychological instrument designed to let people reveal themselves.
Rowan, what made this character last so long? Why didn't it fade like so many others?
Because Columbo was never built on tricks. He was built on time. The writers understood something rare. Intelligence does not need to announce itself. Columbo didn't solve crimes quickly. He stayed. He waited. He returned. He asked again. Each episode unfolded like a conversation rather than a chase. There were no explosions, no dramatic arrests, just the slow tightening of certainty. And because the audience already knew who was guilty, something unusual happened. Viewers didn't watch to discover the truth. They watched to understand people.
So the tension wasn't about what happened, but when it would finally surface.
Exactly. Columbo didn't corner criminals with force. He allowed them to corner themselves. The killers were often powerful, educated, admired. Columbo was none of those things on the surface, and yet, power dissolved in front of him. The show quietly inverted authority. It suggested that intelligence does not belong to status, wealth, or elegance. That idea aged beautifully. As decades passed, Columbo did not feel outdated. He felt reassuring. Because in a noisy world, someone who listens becomes extraordinary. And that is why, even years later, we don't remember the crimes. We remember the man asking the questions.
Rowan, when Columbo returned years later, something felt different.
Yes, time had passed, and unlike most television characters, Columbo did not pretend otherwise. When the series returned in the 1990s, Peter Falk was older, his movements were slower, his voice softer, his pauses longer. But instead of weakening the character, age deepened him. Columbo no longer felt like a detective solving crimes week after week. He felt like a man who had spent his life watching people and had learned patience as a form of wisdom.
Almost as if time itself became part of the performance.
Exactly. The wrinkles, the tired walk, the familiar coat, they didn't break the illusion. They completed it. In many shows, aging is hidden. Here, it was embraced. Viewers weren't watching a character frozen in time. They were watching someone who had lived. And that honesty made the later episodes unexpectedly powerful. Columbo didn't become less believable with age. He became more human.
Rowan, if Columbo became inseparable from Peter Falk, what did that do to him?
It gave him immortality, and it gave him a shadow. There are actors who play many roles and remain themselves. And then there are actors who create something so iconic that the world stops seeing anything else. Peter Falk didn't just star in Columbo. He lived alongside him for decades. The coat became a symbol. The voice became a memory. The posture became familiar even to people who hadn't watched the show in years. And when the world loves a character that much, it begins to ask something strange of the actor. Please remain that person forever.
But no one can remain frozen in time.
No. And Peter Falk aged in public, slowly, gently, in a way that felt almost intimate to the audience. In later years, he continued acting in other projects. He had range, humor, warmth. But Columbo remained the name people said first. And yet, there is something beautiful in that. Because it means he gave the world a companion, not just a performance. Columbo was the rare character people didn't merely admire. They trusted him. So the line between actor and role blurred, not out of confusion, but out of affection.
Rowan, toward the end of his life, something changed.
Yes, and it's important to speak about it gently. As the years passed, Peter Falk began to withdraw from public life. His appearances became rare. Interviews faded. The familiar presence slowly stepped back. Later, it became known that he was living with Alzheimer's disease. For a man whose life was built on observation, memory, and listening, this was especially cruel.
It feels unfair.
It does, but it also reminds us of something important. When illness arrived, the world did not lose Columbo. The character remained intact in memory, preserved exactly as audiences had known him. Episodes continued to air. The coat still hung on his shoulders. The voice still asked one more question. In a strange way, television granted him something rare, continuity beyond presence. While the man faded quietly, the comfort he gave never did. And perhaps that is why we still miss him. Not as a celebrity, but as someone who used to sit with us at night and think slowly with us.
Rowan, even now, decades later, people still return to Columbo.
Yes, and that's the clearest sign of legacy. Columbo didn't survive because of nostalgia alone. He survived because the character speaks to something timeless. In every era, there are loud voices, fast opinions, quick judgments, and Columbo stands apart from that world. He reminds us that intelligence does not need speed, that truth does not require dominance, that patience can be more powerful than force. Modern detectives owe much to him, even when they don't realize it. The quiet observer, the psychological listener, the investigator who wins by understanding people, not overpowering them. You can see traces of Columbo everywhere, in television, in cinema, even in storytelling itself.
Almost as if he taught us a different way to look at others.
Exactly. Columbo doesn't rush to judge. He stays. He listens. He allows people to reveal who they are. That lesson doesn't age. It becomes more valuable. And maybe that's why Peter Falk still feels present. Because he gave us not a hero, but a way of being.
Rowan, when people say they miss him, it doesn't sound like they're talking about a television character.
Because they aren't. People don't miss the plot twists. They don't miss the crimes. They miss the feeling of his presence. Columbo never rushed you, never shouted, never tried to impress. He arrived slowly, stayed politely, and left you thinking. In a world that moves faster every year, that kind of presence becomes rare. Maybe that's why people still return to him late at night. Not to solve something, but to feel accompanied.
As if he were sitting nearby, quietly listening.
Yes, and that's something very few characters ever achieve. Peter Falk gave us that presence. And even after he was gone, it remained. That's why we don't say goodbye to Columbo. We simply remember him.
Before we reach the end of tonight's program, let's take a small pause and welcome Margaret. Margaret, for those who feel a connection to Peter Falk and Columbo, where would you invite them to continue?
Thank you, Clara. This is one of those stories where books don't just inform, they extend the feeling. A beautiful place to begin is Just One More Thing by Peter Falk himself. It's not a biography in the traditional sense. It's warm, humorous, and deeply human, very much like him.
So it feels like listening to him again.
Exactly. His voice is still there between the lines. For readers interested in the cultural impact of Columbo, The Curious Case of the Crime Classic, explores how the show reshaped television storytelling and why it still resonates today.
Because it never followed the usual rules.
Exactly. And finally, for those who want a broader perspective on detective fiction, The Television Crime Fighters places Columbo alongside other iconic figures, showing just how unique he truly was.
It sounds like three very different doors into the same memory.
That's a beautiful way to put it, Clara.
Thank you, Margaret. That was a lovely pause to take with you tonight.
Thank you. It was a pleasure, as always.
Before we close tonight, there's something we can't ignore.
There's an absence that never healed. When Peter Falk left us, it didn't feel like the end of a career. It felt like the loss of a presence. Columbo couldn't be continued, and it couldn't be replaced. Not because the format was impossible, but because the man was.
A remake would feel wrong.
Yes, because Columbo wasn't a character you could recast. He wasn't written to be inherited. He belonged to one voice, one rhythm, one way of standing in a room, and when that voice was gone, something quietly went with it. The world became a little louder without him.
And a little less patient.
We didn't just lose a detective. We lost a way of listening. That absence is still there, quiet, familiar. How much we miss him is proof of how deeply he stayed with us.
Thank you, Rowan, for sharing this moment with us tonight.
Thank you, Clara. It was a beautiful one to remember.
And thank you for staying with us. If this story touched you, please like, comment, subscribe, and stay with us.